Special thanks goes to the following organizations and individuals who gave a voice to Zimbabwe Exemption Permit holders, a voice which had been previously proscribed. The Helen Suzman Foundation, Judge of the High Court of Pretoria, Justice C. Collis, Judge of the High Court of Pretoria, Justice G. Malandi, Acting Judge of the Pretoria High Court, Justice M. Mohla, the Supreme Court of Appeal judges, and the Constitutional Court justices. The value of my submission lies in its details, and they are lengthy. At the time when the Department of Home Affairs sees it fit to call for submissions, I may not be able to express myself in a few minutes or the number of words allocated. I therefore saw it fit to produce this detailed video. As the adage goes, the devil is in the detail. The courts have dealt with the law. I must deal with facts. That is the lived reality. I shall do so without fear or restraint. South Africa is a country where its citizens can speak and write whatever they want. Journalists have the knack of making simplest things interesting. But most importantly, justice delayed is justice denied. This submission is not a dogmatic recital of my stay in South Africa. It will try to bring out my experience, my vices, my virtues, my principles, just like the tributaries make the magnificent Limpopo River to flow, collecting water from its catchment area. There are a number of misconceptions which need to be addressed. The ZEP is a South African government program, and its custodian is the Department of Home Affairs. It is not a Zimbabwean program. The department cannot under any circumstances be seen to be disowning the program. Ownership and protection are inseparable. I am sure many will agree with me that the past few years, that is from 2019 to the present, the Department of Home Affairs has disowned the program and failed dismally to protect it against the onslaught from pseudo-nationalists and errant politicians. The ZEP holders have been deliberately and systematically criminalized and placed with the illegal migrant tag. The tag purely designed to shame and silence the majority of the ZEP holders, while creating alarm and despondence among South Africans, thus fueling xenophobia. It is this criminalization of innocent, hard-working people that has contributed to the refutation by employers and human rights organizations. In the contrary to the popular misconception of ZEP holders as irregular migrants who had to be regularized in 2010, it is not surprising that the majority of ZEP holders at the inception of the ZSP permit in 2010 were in South Africa on a seasonal work permit visa. This attitude can be taken to be a denial of the loyalty and abundantly capable ZEP holders. It is, however, explicable, as the records are there for all to see. As the ZEP holders, we find ourselves in a position which distorts and exaggerates everything so that what is true appears false and what is false appears true. The other misconception which is common among the people is that ZEP holders and Zimbabweans in general are cowards. I guess as you are watching this video, someone is saying that, I ought to be ashamed of myself to produce this video. They are calling me a coward who should be confronting the ZANU-PF regime instead. However, to live a toxic and life-threatening environment takes a good deal of courage. A person must have both physical and mental strength, and above all, courage to conceive the plan of flight. And it is the life-threatening environment which was obtaining in Zimbabwe in 2010 which persuaded the South African government to issue Zimbabweans who were gainfully employed in South Africa with the ZSP. The conditions here outlined. Have the conditions in Zimbabwe changed? The answer is yes, for those who have heard the Zimbabwean story, but a big no to those who have experienced it. And every time I visit Zimbabwe, it seems a new world to me. I find that those who used to be poor have become rich. Rich, poor. New suburbs, townships, and new streets. I walk like a stranger in my hometown, Gweru. There are new systems, new bylaws, and new actors. Everything has become dearer, contrary to when I first came to South Africa in 1998. I found everything here very expensive. I just bought the inverters I had come for and left the next day. In Zimbabwe, I see crowds of miserable people, and to distract their minds from their troubles, they go up and down the mountains to pray. Crowds feeding on wild fruits on their way back. I'm sure you have seen huge Mapostori sects in their white regalia. The luxury of those who drive is only apparent because of the contrast. The two extremes are 10 and 10 about. Beheld and beholder. The liberator, most brutal and most tyrannical of all rulers. Zimbabwe is a country with a noble and heroic history, but on the verge of ruin. Corruption, vice, and huge egos being the main culprits. The country's vice president has made it public that corruption is now a security risk in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, a country which has gold, diamonds, and intellectuals, and could achieve. But I doubt it will ever become a prosperous country. The Zimbabwe Exemption Permit holders have been pigeonholed as Zimbabwe opposition party members. Yet, this is far from it. The reason for us being in exile from our country cannot be reinvented. However, the Zimbabwean government, with its assistance from its proxies and agents, may have succeeded in changing the narrative. One regime sympathizer, Rutendo Matinyarare, boasted on social media to that effect. Both the South African government and the Zimbabwean government did not deny his claim. Matinyarare made claims to the effect that in their quest they robbed in Simba Chitando, the infamous lawyer who was conspicuous by his antics during the Pretoria High Court hearings. Chitando had to be reprimanded by the High Court justices on a number of occasions during the hearings, as it had become very clear that he was bent on sabotaging the very people he ought to be representing. On the other hand, the ZANU-PF government was caught shedding crocodile tears, issuing statements that Zimbabweans are welcome home and that the government is willing to assist in every possible way to make sure that Zimbabweans get home safely. The ZANU-PF double standards were exposed when it published customs regulations putting restrictions on how many cars and of what value can the returnees bring into the country. People who have spent their entire working life in South Africa are being asked to bring home basics. The irony of it all is that the same ZANU-PF government has for the past 24 years been crying about being under sanctions, requesting its neighbors, in the SADC, to persuade the United States government to lift the sanctions. But here we see the same government sanctioning their own. All our acquired assets will buy us a cheerful welcome, but given the circumstances, we are to be subjected to humiliation.
2008, all manner of trouble breaks out in Alexander Township in Johannesburg. Attack on these foreigners, particularly Zimbabweans. Then it spread elsewhere. Xenophobia, Afrophobia. So I say, when I saw that thing, I was in government, I was president. I say, but this is not Alexander Township. Alex for decades has had Zimbabweans and Mozambicans and this and that and that, and never ever this conflict. Why? There's a mistake we made as government, and not to disclassify an intelligence document about what happened in Alexander 2008. That thing was organized.
What a sad retirement, and above all, forever remain strangers. The shocking revelations by former President Thabo Mbeki in this video should be declassified. I may ask, who knows which is worse, rejection? The declaration by the former minister Aaron Motsoaledi on several occasions that the ZEP will not be renewed has had a devastating effect on many. For the minister to just announce such a position over a people who have spent almost their adult working life in South Africa and knowing very well that their own government doesn't like them. Either he was inconsiderate or just lack of Ubuntu. International best practices is a cliché which has become synonymous with the Department of Home Affairs when dealing with the ZEP holders issue, citing migration laws from Canada and the Netherlands, all in an effort to put us out of countenance. Some of the international best practices the South African government will shy away from include the UK's Afghan resettlement scheme, the UK-Rwanda migrants deal. Sweden will offer migrants up to $37,000 to go home. The UK repatriation incentive scheme. Germany needs up to 400,000 migrant workers for its next industrial revolution, while Canada is attracting migrants from all over the world. This takes us back in time as we look at the Wenela issue. Again, we see here the ZANU-PF government using its mouthpiece, the Herald, to sow discontent after the Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Schreiber, had announced that he is in the process of setting up a migration board which will deal, among other issues, with the issue of the ZEP holders and the proposed hearings. I also hope that the Department of Home Affairs will avoid taking the Wenela route, where a few years down the line the ZEP holders will pursue a class action against the department, and end up spending immense sums of money on the most senseless court cases as witnessed before. While most ZEP holders will opt to spend the rest of their days in South Africa, where they do not pretend any rights or entitlement, and where they have mastered to act in accordance with the customs and norms. Most importantly, we have made South Africa our own. Who knows how many more days we will be. What surprised all and sundry is that in the midst of court cases, the obstinate Minister Aaron Motsoaledi, and without consultation went ahead and issued a directive that the ZEP holders must apply for waivers and that the successful candidates be allowed to get ordinary work permits. It was also equally surprising when his successor, Dr. Leon Schreiber, under Immigration Circular number 7 of 2024, maintained the waiver process, even with the Constitutional Court judgment handed down on a number of occasions on the social media X. I found myself asking the minister and his Department of Home Affairs whether they were in conformity with the Constitutional Court ruling. Why was the waiver process so wrong? I have reached at what is called a certain age, an age at which fortune frowns on one as a rule, and friendships become rare. But most importantly, after 14 years of hard work, ZEP holders' vitality suddenly becomes an unimportant factor of our circumstances. And yet, it mattered then as it matters now. The waiver approach is as if nothing has changed. I was 44 years old, 2010, when I first got my ZSP under the Zimbabwe Dispensation Program. Today, I am 58 years old, and my waning vitality is evident as my gray hair and my white beard is as conspicuous. This raises the question: how different is the life of a ZEP holder? I cannot describe the dejection into which the minister's pronunciations cast me. I was miserable, ashamed, and confused. Although I acknowledged his citation of the law and his responsibilities, I could not but think that he was wrong in advising that our stay in South Africa had been terminated at the click of a finger. He must have known himself that it was not likely to go unchallenged. And luckily, the Helen Suzman Foundation did rise up to the occasion. The ZEP holders had their hands tied by the clause in the permit and could not do anything about it. If the Zimbabwe government was sincere, it would have been the first one to challenge Motsoaledi's position. I was more nearly worthy to Zimbabwe 15 years ago than I am now. Then I could still work passionately, but now some of the delicacy and power of idealization, which in its own justifies the need of passion, is passed from me. In the eyes of many, I am now near garbage, used like a condom and being flushed down the drain. The question is, why is the ZANU-PF government willing to accept garbage. Why the sheer hardness of heart? What has killed all the sense of pity? Imagine, to my surprise, on reading Simba Chitando's post on X, only after the pronouncement by the minister in Zep Holders' favor, allowing consultation with all stakeholders, Chitando had not raised a voice as far as I am concerned. When the Department of Home Affairs had issued an illegal directive instructing Zep holders to apply for waivers, Chitando, who had been part of the court hearings, and he should have known better. His posts did not put me out of temper, but I tried to be exceedingly polite as I responded to his ex-post. In return, he blocked me. Had I become an obstacle in the lawyer's path? Time will tell. When my wife and I arrived in South Africa in 2008, I realized that everything in South Africa has a character of its own, and not to mention the cultural shock. Above all, I admired the efficiency, the good roads, and the beautiful buildings, displaying wonderful architecture. This again evoked the memories of the Wenela migrants who had worked in the mines and the construction industry. A foreigner stepping foot on South African soil must cultivate resignation. We had to think of some means of earning a living and be able to bring up our children. I was careful not to do anything that the law forbids me, and not to be compared to anyone else. I was in possession of a seasonal work permit and therefore a legal migrant. Mother luck was on our side, and my wife got a teaching job. It was a 6 months contract position, and on expiry she was given an option to take up a job as a hostel guardian or to find work elsewhere. The guardian position, however, required a couple, since it was primary school kids who needed taking care of. The employment humiliated me. I felt degraded from a graduate and a technician to a mere guardian. Like they say, happy is a man who can manage to keep himself. I stifled my better nature and threw my heart and soul into my new job, which assured me of an income and placement of my children in a South African private school. While working as a guardian, I started to learn to look upon South Africa as my adopted country, for I could not hope to return to the one which I had my birthright. That being said, it does not mean I didn't face some challenges. It is the custom of the country to laugh at strangers. To most South Africans, all foreigners to them are makwerekweres or grigambas, much more unpleasant names than a dog. It must be also understood most women do not speak or think this way, as they have love relationships with foreigners. In some cases, they make babies with them, and the latter may be said to have attributed to the then Minister of Home Affairs, Aaron Motsoaledi, to issue a directive to the effect that children born to foreigners must be registered at the Department of Home Affairs. The ZEP holder is no exception, as he or she has been called by the same derogatory names, regardless of being legally in the country. Children, unlike adults, are a blessing. In my new job, I didn't feel like a stranger anymore. Thanks to the kids to whom I became their adopted father, and who in return treated me as such, I started to realize that I had to accept South Africa as the center of my further development, and its boundaries as the field that my fortunes had to be won through the engagement of both my physical and mental powers. Instinct teaches a migrant what science and experience cannot teach a local. I resigned from employment 4 years later to pursue business. Back in Zimbabwe, I had operated a successful electrical engineering business. I had an industrial premises and, above all, a home. I registered a company and invited 2 South African colleagues for BEE purposes. The business I ventured into was the book publishing business. During my teenage years, I had worked for 2 publishing companies in Gweru, Zimbabwe, namely Mambo Press and Modern Press. Between 2005 and 2006, I was to become a columnist of the Motor magazine, a Mambo Press publication. While working as a guardian, I published my first book, titled Gokura Ideology, Why Zimbabwe is in Crisis. I had started the book in 2006 while working for the now defunct Center for Peace Initiatives in Africa. South Africa became the perfect place to publish the book, as there was no censor and it was affordable to publish. My objective in writing this book was not so much to make money. It was my desire to expose the evil system obtaining in Zimbabwe, which has resulted in me and many others to seek refuge in South Africa. I gave away for free most of the copies I printed. Very few people had taken the trouble of exposing the evil system by way of writing books. For the government, the ZANU-PF government, allows no one in principle to write about it, either in praise or blame. I was convinced that this work was reserved for me, and on account of my exceptional situation. I was, however, rewarded in an exceptional way. I gave a certain gentleman a free copy, and in return he donated an entire library. I was really surprised. The priceless library is the one behind me in this video. Another gift was of an intangible nature, but more precious than the gold and diamonds of the entire world. I have been fortunate enough to have lived to witness Emmerson Mnangagwa, the chief perpetrator of the Gukurahundi genocide, set up a Gukurahundi genocide hearings and with his own mouth pronounce Gukurahundi genocide. It was indeed a moment of victory for all the victims and a well-deserved disgrace for the perpetrators. In 2015, I was to receive a letter from my father, a letter which contained sad and painful words. Let me try to translate the letter in which my father advised me that I should stay in South Africa. For here, at least the laws assure me complete liberty. Robert Mugabe had surrounded himself with flatters. As it was, he had grown to consider himself a demigod, with the saddest results for himself and his people. Kuna baba Wataro, ndakanzwa kuti makapara mhosva yekusoropodza nyika ino. Ndinoti kwamuri, chitogarai ikoko zvakanaka, musaita musikanzwa munodzingwa mukasvikosungwa. Mutoronga pamwe chete nababa Watamu, ndiye woita gumbo renyu rekuuya kuno. Ndaigara ndichitaura kuti siyanai nenyaya iyi. Musabhadhara chikwereti chemvura chakasiyiwa nemukomana uya aigara pano. Muchenjere kunyengedzwa netsotsi iri. Chitotengesai dzimba dzenyu nguva ichipo. Ndamira pano, ndini Mureverwi. As if that was not enough, on the 18th of October 2016, my wife discovered a strange round object stuck on our gate. The object looked like a landmine, and next to it was Mnangagwa inscription. I tweeted and tagged Professor Jonathan Moyo and ZANU-PF a photograph of the item. Professor Moyo was the then Minister of Information. He showed no curiosity and ignored the tweet. This was before his flight into exile in 2017, as he did not respond. A police report was made and a bomb specialist was called and removed the object under unclear circumstances. My father died a sad man on the 17th of November 2017, the day Robert Mugabe was toppled in a coup. I did not go to bury my father. South Africans should know better of what happens during the transition period. many South Africans died between 1990 and 1994, including Chris Hani, and the perpetrators were difficult to find as the blame game rears its ugly face. It is believed that many people died during the Robert Mugabe coup, and no reports were either made or they were ignored. In my father's case, my sister said that the initial police docket that was prepared by the police when the freak accident happened disappeared. They had to do another one. And when she tried to sue the government for negligence, judgment was reserved and she had to pay the cost. However, my father was not the first to advise me to sell my Zimbabwe assets and settle in South Africa. Please allow me to read an excerpt from my book, The Visitation. Reading on page 99. In 2007, my wife and I decided to visit South Africa on an employment and business opportunity fact-finding mission. The economic situation in Zimbabwe was on a nosedive. We visited relatives in Hermanus in the Western Cape, and one afternoon we decided to go to the beach. On that particular day, the sun was bright and shining, while the water from afar was glittering and inviting, only to find out that it was icy cold as one tried to put one's foot into the ocean. We decided to sunbathe instead. Next to us, along the sandy silver beach, was a family of 2 adults and 3 children. We sat down for a while, then I thought of back home. What was I going to tell them about my Atlantic Ocean experience? I stood up, closed my eyes, and ran towards the water. When I came out of the freezing ocean, chilled and disappointed, I walked towards my wife, who had cleverly decided not to follow me into the cold waters. She had remained basking in the sun in a swimsuit. The white man from the family that was next to us stood up and walked up to me, and as he approached me, I noticed he was physically disadvantaged. Both his hands were not fully developed. They were very short and dangling just above his chest, a condition known as amniotic band syndrome. He greeted me and I greeted him back. He introduced himself and I told him that my name was Rads. Rads is Ruyezo in short, and it was coined by my Form 1 classmate, the late James Mangurenje. Sadly, I cannot recall the white man's name. Open quote. South Africa is the promised land. Go back to Zimbabwe and sell your possessions and come back and establish yourself here, close quote. He said in tones of absolute certainty. I was surprised to hear someone say that to me, and a white man for that matter. I then felt that there was something special about this man. I told him that I was interested in establishing myself in South Africa. I did not tell him about my dream house project back in Zimbabwe, but I explained to him my desire to see my fellow Zimbabweans free from all forms of oppression. The government had robbed me and my fellow countrymen of our liberty and economic prosperity. And most families were on the verge of starvation. I really wanted to be able to assist in changing the fortunes of my people in Zimbabwe. He insisted that my future was in South Africa, and those back home will find ways of how to address their situation. I did not want to hear that. I knew my political footprint back home required constant refurbishment, but I could not make him understand where I was coming from, for his position was crystal clear. I also donated 3 copies of my book, The Visitation, to the Department of Arts and Culture. Prior to the coup, my secondary school classmate, Admire Makotose, called me to say he wanted to see me. He had learned that I was in South Africa. I had last seen him in 1983 at Ascot Secondary School. I was excited to meet an old friend in foreign land. He came to my house and we talked about the good old days, what we had come to be. He said he was interested in buying my books. I sold him Kukrawundi Ideology, Why Zimbabwe is in Crisis, and When the Predator Cries Foul. He then said to me he knew one day I was going to be a writer. I asked him how so. He then reminded me of a class incident where I had not submitted my English composition, and when the English teacher had returned the marked assignments, he asked me to read my essay to the class, knowing very well that I had not submitted my work. I confidently stood up and, reading from a blank page, I got a standing ovation, to the total surprise of the teacher, Mr. Makule. I had forgotten about the incident, which proves that I am not perfect, but human after all. Before Admire left, he asked me about the succession issues in Zimbabwe. This was at a time when Mnangagwa was in South Africa. He also told me that Mnangagwa was holed up in a church which I will not mention for obvious reasons. I told him that I did not support Mnangagwa because he was not presidential material, since he had surrounded himself with sycophants and thugs. He in turn told me about how he was involved in sanctions busting using the national railways of Zimbabwe. When he was in his car and just about to drive off, he had the nerve to show me a recording device he had used to record our entire conversation. I told him I was not perturbed at all and that he can go to hell. His actions came as no surprise to me, as his father was responsible for organizing ZANU-PF youths during Kukrawundi genocide in the 80s. The youth who caused havoc in Mambo and Taba Township, as well as the Lower Gweru area, were under his father's command. Admire's visit came just a week before my father was killed in an accident. Only a migrant can put up with such betrayal. My company published books which are currently on the Department of Education's curriculum and library catalogs. And that's contributing immensely to the development of the South African child. While most of my English language novels were translated into indigenous languages, Vadimova Village is the company's flagship, for it is the grade 12 Spedi Home Language set book. I will not describe the over 1 million students who have been examined since the book was placed on the Department of Education curriculum catalog. And what a brilliant contribution for the company and a priceless contribution to South Africa. As for my novel, When the Predator Cries Foul, a brilliant African story which the English assessors at the Department of Education recommended for grade 10 English second language learners. The novel, however, did not feature on the department's curriculum catalog. It was turned down on BEE basis only because it was written by a non-South African black person. Irrespective of the fact that my other two business partners were black and South African. In the final analysis, the biggest losers were the South African children. The importance of reading a story that one can relate to cannot be overemphasized. The petty jealous, real or imaginary, can only be endured by a migrant. Odd but natural. I had counted on this novel for a lifetime breakthrough. My publishing business took me places. I was guest to the International Rights Center, IRC, formerly London Book Fair, where rights professionals go to conduct business, that is, rights selling. Most importantly, I was promoting South African products. I was also to represent South African publishers at a WIPO conference in Yaoundé, Cameroon, where issues of intellectual property were under the spotlight. Surely one would have thought that opportunities to leave South Africa and stay in the UK or Cameroon had arisen, but I remained loyal to South Africa. The question one might ask is, why did I not apply for the mainstream business visa? The answer is simple. The conditions which were set for the ZEP before the Pretoria High Court ruling did not permit, as alluded to before. With the proceeds from the business, we bought a business premises in Soshanguve. This was in response to the Gauteng government township business initiative, and we have full title to the premises. I was devoted to drama and art since my primary school days. My friend, who was a school principal at a school in Soshanguve, allowed me to introduce marimba music at a school. I did that with the help of a Zimbabwean friend, Kulu Dube, or Kulumani Dube, and the kids loved it. But most importantly, they were fast in learning. The same could not be said for English drama, as it brought me a lot of challenges. Isgqebezana is a drama play which I wrote. I had to teach them everything. It is in the public domain that South Africa has a literacy challenge. The country is rated as one of the countries on the bottom of the reading index in the entire world. I taught them how to read, pronounce, and learn their lines by heart. As soon as they knew one page, they forgot the preceding one. We, however, soldiered on, and finally we became fluent and managed to confidently perform in front of an audience. I had hoped that one day we would be able to perform at the National State Theatre, only to learn how impossible it was for a foreigner to get a slot. 3 years after I left my South African acquired profession, my wife, who remained teaching at the school, delivered a letter from one of the boys that I had taken care of. His name is Leroy Leroux. This is what I received. For Mr. Aram Tiswa, may you be graced with all the luck in the world, sir. Mr. Aram Tiswa came to my school almost 6 years ago and left 4 years later. That was now 3 years ago. And still, every time the man comes to my mind, I have respect, reverence, and admiration for the man he is. I learned more from him than any other adult figure in my high school career, and I thank him for that. Mr. Mtizwa is an extremely intelligent man who holds himself lightly with contagious humor and a smile to match. He entertained his students while giving them a role model worth his amassed knowledge. As a young writer, Mr. Mtizwa taught me an important role that any writer around needs to have: perseverance and determination. He is and always will be an inspiration to me and the future forms of myself. When Mr. Mtizwa decided to leave the school, it was like a fundamental part to our maturing into adults left with him. Yet, we too had to acknowledge that a man as brilliant, great, and inspiring was too big for the place he was guiding us in. He needed to expand and be reborn to blossom, because a man like him doesn't stop growing. It brings me great joy to know that he is doing exceptionally well in the world, because he taught me nothing but how to do that myself. Thank you for letting us know you. I have built myself a decent house, a home to live in. The house is along a road that leads to the local primary school, and the entire community, including school children, are aware that the house belongs to a Zimbabwean. After school, some kids pass by my house, and if by any chance they find me outside, they will greet Dumela, and they'll proceed to say to me in English, "Your house is beautiful." These are young primary kids whom I suppose have been inspired and learned something which they will emulate in future. Some kids and adults as well enjoy looking themselves in the reflective windows. However, my scariest dream is that one day they will wake up to find I have been deported and my house confiscated. The unintended consequences of some decisions are dire and may damage the same communities they sought to protect. However, there's always the exception to the rule. As one middle-aged man approached me and told me right straight in the eye that he had been contemplating snatching the house from me. What happened with the children whom I so desperately wanted to see develop into responsible adults? My son pursued a career in aviation and he got his flying wings, while my daughter, she pursued a Bachelor's of Law degree and she graduated with a BCom honors degree. I finally managed to complete the construction of my dream house in Zimbabwe. The house is built on prime land. To my left is the mayor's mansion, and along the same close to the right are vacant stands which belong to Emerson Mnangagwa and his cabinet ministers. These stands have been in their sorry state for 25 years now. The most odious acts of despotism, such as dispossession of people's assets, have been committed in the past. It is not surprising that as I speak, Mnangagwa and Kahutu, out of petty jealous, are meeting to conspire and plot against my property. The 2024-25 Finance Minister's budget statement is proof that Mnangagwa is about to strike. In 1999, I visited the seat of Saginaw in Michigan, the United States of America. I was part of the seat of Gweru delegation. We had gone there to learn and share experiences on service provision, paying particular attention to water and sewage systems. At the conclusion of the 3-day visit, I received an honorary citizenship from the seat of Saginaw as a token of appreciation, and I value it dearly. The contrast between a 3-day visit and almost 15 years or over 15 years of being in a country and being a visitor, and on the other hand, a ZEP business or employee, and the nature itself, the other one was a learning experience, while the other one was a working and or a business and building period. And then you compare the response of the people in the United States of America and those from an African country. It's quite staggering. A man or a woman who adapts himself or herself so readily and so effectively to any change in his environment only displays the flexibility which marks the most intensely vital species and is an asset to any progressive country in the world, and not to mention the priceless and intangible heritage of work culture and ethics imparted in most communities by the hardworking Zimbabweans. One might choose to ask, how come you seem or I seem to blow my own whistle while my country of birth is burning? The answer is simple. I will need twice as much time to explain my contributions to Zimbabwe. The Pretoria High Court judgment had a double-edged sword. It gave ZEP holders a voice, but it has potential of leaving us stateless. Prudence is not one of my distinguished qualities. The wise will quickly realize that presenting themselves before the Department of Home Affairs and speak ill of the ZANU-PF administration will attract serious repercussions. Will that discourage many ZEP holders to come forward? Or, since it is a court order, will the department make it compulsory for all ZEP holders to make submissions in one way or the other? The judgment, the Department of Home Affairs and the Minister, Dr. Schreiber, a historic moment is before you. The option is between writing a history which is just a short celebration moment, or a history that will outlive each and every one of us. The ZEP holder echoing from the distant future, a history which might alter a whole lot of things. Your greatest challenge as a department is not ZEP holders, but artificial intelligence, AI. Many people die without having had, really an opportunity to write history. And this is not because they aren't witty, but because circumstances of a sufficiently extraordinary nature have never arisen to plug them out of the ordinary. There is no special program that can be concluded without an audit. This proposal is in compliance with the requirements of the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act 3 of 2000, including the Auditor General's Office as a Chapter 9 institution. The Department of Home Affairs must account for all ZSP and ZEP migrants. This arises from the fact that we are informed of some shenanigans and renditions that could have taken place. While South Africans have a propensity for xenophobia attacks, and many lives could have been lost. The cases of human trafficking and disappearances are on the increase, not to mention the risk of statelessness faced by children of ZEP parents. The South African government may have committed a genocide by putting ZEP holders on lockdown during the COVID-19 period and failed to give them any form of assistance. The government grants were strictly for South African citizens. How did the ZEP holders manage to survive? Or did a substantial number of them succumb to COVID-19 and the harsh lockdown conditions. The need for an audit cannot be overemphasized. Dr. Leon Schreiber, when asked about the ZEP holders, he said he was going to address the matter without a predetermined position. If, on the other hand, you are better than your predecessor, you may offer ZEP holders citizenship. The South African Constitution urges you to respect those who have built this country. We have the right to permanently live in South Africa because we have built it with our sweat and blood.